Hello, everybody, again. My name is Ines Vodopivec, and I will be hosting today's conference together with Caroline Archer-Paré from the Center of Printing History and Culture from the University of Birmingham. At the beginning, I would like to invite our director of our National and University Library of Slovenia, Mr. William Leben, to say a few introductory words. So, please.
Well, thank you. Dear conference speakers and participants, dear colleagues, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity of welcoming you all today. Here, it's our great honor, so to say, to host you and this international scientific conference about places, spaces, and the printing press, as make a title. Welcome in our National and University Library virtual space. We organized this conference together with the Center for Printing History and Culture at the Birmingham City University. The conference is important because it represents new practices in scientific cooperation, enabling speakers from all over the world to participate, present, and discuss their recent research with modern technology in a one-day webinar. We will have the pleasure to hear the speakers from 9 countries and 4 continents. From India, Brazil, Canada, United Kingdom, United States, Italy, Ireland, Belgium, and Slovenia. So we see it's a true global event. Thank you again to everyone for being here with us, and I wish you have a successful webinar. And let me express my wish and expectations to welcoming you in a real space of National and University Library of Slovenia in the, I hope, near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. Thank you for your words. It's really an extraordinary event. And when we were preparing this conference, we were talking about it, and we said, yes, it's something special we are doing here now. We are gathering practices from our research interests in one space, in one time, in one day. So yeah, this is really something special. Thank you very much again. Caroline Archer-Paré, could I please invite you to say a few words on thematic and a thematic overview of our conference, please?
Thank you, Ines. It was 2019 when Ines and I first started discussing this conference. And of course, the intention was to hold the event in the National Library of Slovenia. The place of the event, Ljubljana, and the space in which it was to be held, the National Library, were really going to be both very integral to the conference and take central stage. And thus place and space became the theme for this gathering. As a result, I found myself revisiting a germ of an idea which I first explored in my own doctoral thesis some 20 years ago. My work looked at a 20th century English printing house called the Kynoch Press. And whilst I was particularly interested in the press's typographic contributions, I was also aware of another aspect of its work. During World War II, the skills and materials used by the press to produce photo engraving plates were redeployed on Britain's atomic bomb project. But how did a printer become an unlikely partner in such an extraordinary event? In some ways, the answer was unremarkable. It was simply being at the right place and in the right space at the right time. But this started me thinking about how the confluence of time, place, and space over the centuries has been so important in the development of so many aspects of printing and print culture, but it's often been disregarded by historians. So, for example, 5 centuries earlier, Johann Gutenberg in Mainz in Germany also benefited from the circumstances of his time, place, and space in order to bring to fruition his idea of printing from movable type. His invention, of course, owed much to the natural resources of Mainz and the skillfulness of its metalworkers. Gutenberg himself was a goldsmith who cut punches, and he appropriated locally sourced materials and the tools of the region and put them to use in making the molds and casting the amalgams necessary for making type. Gutenberg's printing press was, perhaps, an adaptation of the wine press, which was also found in his native Rhineland. That printing from movable type emerged in 15th century Mainz was, therefore, a result of the confluence of time, place, and space, a triumvirate of circumstances which enabled the transfer of skills from old trades to the nascent printing industry. But both Gutenberg and the Kynott Press were able to respond to the demands of their time was because of the spatial and temporal environments in which they worked and which facilitated critical interactions. But while printing historians have paid attention to the technology of Gutenberg's invention and Kynott's contribution to the atom bomb, less consideration has been given to the environments in which these inventions happened. This is true for much of printing history and print culture, and it is this gap that this conference seeks to fill. So today we welcome a diverse and fascinating range of talks, all of which consider the importance of place and space on the development of printing across eras and across boundaries. Of course, there is a certain irony that a conference considering place, space, and time is actually being held nowhere and everywhere, and is taking place across multiple time zones simultaneously. But the internet and our new virtual life is providing us all with an altered sense of what place and space means, and with a fresh understanding of time. Perhaps this newfound comprehension will also influence our understanding of today's presentations and bring fresh perspectives on what we thought we knew. So we hope you really enjoy the event. Thank you.
Dear Caroline Archer-Paré, thank you very much for your extensive introduction into the theme, which has shown us a frame in which we will today present and hear the presentations. Do you hear me well? I hope. Okay. It is our great pleasure that we have more than 100 participants today and 21 presenters from all over the world. But before we begin, I would only have a few technical instructions to tell you. All participants should keep their cameras and microphones off at all times, except for the chairs and presenters in each panel. The program is scheduled between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Central European Time. It is made up of 7 channels. In each panel, we have 3 speakers presenting for 15 minutes. Persons chairing each session will shortly introduce the speakers. Longer abstracts of their talks and biographies are made available in the conference abstracts booklet on our conference website, and you can also find the link to the conference website and to the booklet in the chat. Maybe we can post it again because it's already a little bit, it was already published a little bit earlier. At the end of each panel, there will be 10 minutes reserved for questions. Questions should be written in the chat. We kindly ask panel chairs to gather questions and lead the discussion with the presenters. Presentations will be recorded, so we would kindly ask you to use the chat only for the questions. All other communication will otherwise also be recorded. There are 5-minute breaks between the panels and 1 hour lunch break at 12:30 Central European Time. In the breaks, we will be transmitting video materials and other presentations related to our conference theme. This is all. I hope you will enjoy the event. Thank you. So, we were a little bit early now, so maybe I would already invite Mr. Joel Saunders, the chair of the first session, to start with the introduction to the speakers.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, everybody. I hope I've got this right. Pozdravni Nagovor. I'm not sure how my pronunciation is there. Hello, everyone. And I've got the pleasure of introducing the first panel today, and I'll take each speaker at a time as we come to them. So the first speaker for this excellent conference is Renata Scholler, who comes from a background in geography. She was educated at the universities of Ljubljana and Zagreb, where she received her PhD. She has worked at the Ljubljana National University Library since 1996, and from 1996 to 2002, she headed the library's map and pictorial collection. From 2007 to 2018, she was head of Special Collections Division. Now, her research focuses on the application of new IT services for accessing maps in a library environment. Renata has taken part in several international and Slovenian research projects and has authored research articles dealing with information science and librarianship. She has also chaired and co-founded several international associations of map curators at cultural heritage institutions, including the LIBA Maps Expert Group and the Map and Geoinformation Curators Group, MAGIC. So, Renata, if you'd like to begin.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Renata Scholler from the National and University Library, and I've been curating maps for almost 25 years here in the map collection. As the name and the topic of the conference refer to the places and spaces, maps are maybe the natural choice for this ice-breaking presentation. I will try to share with you some theoretical facts and my thoughts about maps in general on the example of Ducati's Carniola Tabula Chorografica, orographic map of the Duchy Carniola. Carniola was the historic region and the hereditary land of the Habsburg monarchy, which was located in the central and western part of today's Slovenia. Map Ducati's Carniola possesses the distinction of being the finest and the most important single cartographic document in the region's history. It was produced following a decade field work by the author, Janez Dizma Florjancic, a Carniolian priest, geographer, astronomer, mathematician, and cartographer. He was a man of enormous intellectual curiosity, who built his own observatory and wrote valuable treatises on astronomy. But his true passion was exploring the land. The map was the result of his more than 10 years of work when he traveled through the Carniola and performed geodetic measurements on almost 300 major hills. Based on these measurements, he corrected existing maps and produced an extremely accurate map that was intended for the general public. The large wall map, about 2 meters wide and long, is printed on 12 sheets. And while the technical quality of the engraving is a little bit provincial, the work is artistically ambitious with elaborate pictorial representation and Rococo imagery, producing a beautifully unique visual effect. Map as an expression of regional identity. The map is geographical and scientific document of its time that encodes in a spatially accurate way a wealth of information about society, culture, and the environment that other historical document simply cannot. So map as an expression of regional identity as a geographical document. On the map of Ducatis Carniola, the name of the highest Slovenian mountain, Mount Triglav, is provided here for the first time. Map encodes information about society, culture, and the environment. The bottom right corner of the map features a richly ornamented cartouche with the map's title. Allegorical sculptures and land characteristics are the main title decorations. The map in general reflects human creativity in experiencing space. On the one hand, it is an immaterial reflection of cultural spatial perception at a given time, and on the other, a material result of the technology and the art of a specific period and place. For example, like a material result of the technology and art, in the upper right corner of the map features a large instant containing one of the most iconic plan. This was the first published plan of Ljubljana, and very nice view of Ljubljana contained with an elegant Rococo frame. The stories it tells us are epics about human perseverance in confronting natural barriers. We are talking about 18th century, the first expeditions to the Alpine world. Although Floriančič did not climb the highest mountain in Slovenia, he measured it quite accurately. He missed only by 162 meters above the right height. The first ascent on Triglav was in 1778. The stories map tell us are also epics about seeking our own identity. Mount Triglav is a symbol of Slovenia and can be found in the national coat of arms and also on the flag. As communication collections of selected and coded information, maps reflect military, political, economic, cultural, religious, and social patterns in the mosaic of everyday life. In this way, they provide interdisciplinary access to many historical issues of regional identity. For example, what patterns can be found on Floriančič map? As I said before, personalized Carniola in the cartouche is surrounded by the coats of their arms of noble families responsible for the preparation and publication of the map and the provincial coat of the arm. This is political and also economic pattern in this map. Two puts, forged iron in the cave, an allusion to ironworks, an important manufacture in the province. And by the legend and the scale, couple are depicted in the stylized costume of that time, and the shepherd with a characteristic coat made of licher, known through the Alpine and Subalpine area. Here you can also find globes and some other instruments necessary for making maps in this time. The map is read as an entity that reflects mathematical, linguistic, and decorative perspectives. However, various elements of maps must be analyzed with the cognizance of their creation in specific place and time, because very often they both reflect and also fight reality. And how Floriančič map reflects mathematical perspective. In a letter to the reader, among other, he also states his mathematical basis for determining the longitude of Ljubljana. The map is very rich in geographical names of toponyms, which are mostly in the version of the period of its creation. Here are mostly in German, in Latin, and also some in local dialect. As such, map remains a critical source for linguistic researches. And the decorative element most present in the cartouche indicate, for example, among other things, the rituals of the rivers. Neptune pours the rivers Sava and Kolba from a pumpkin jug. On the previous slide, I mentioned the richness of the toponyms as a starting point of various linguistic rituals. Used toponyms can also tell us about the cartographer as the member of the society. Slovenian territory was under influence of Germany for centuries, and hence most maps printed by the mid-19th century only used German geographical names. The language used on the maps solidified the role of distinguishing the ruling elite from the majority population and served as a political tool of the German culture that the cartographer belonged to or abided by. Floriančič was a popular and politically connected member of the clergy, and as such, he was able to raise the vast funds necessary to have his manuscript map of Carniola published. Maps, although the work of individuals, necessarily reflect wider social events and characteristics of cartographic and print tradition in which they were created. Cartography made great advances in the 18th century, most likely due to the political and military desires and necessity for accurate territorial surveys and maps. During this period, France became the leader in European cartography, and the achievement of French cartography were directly or indirectly through German cartographers, for example, Jean-Baptiste Woman influenced Floriančič. Engraver Abraham Kalschmidt was, for example, born in Augsburg, Germany, active in Vienna, Austria, and Ljubljana. And without his engraving skill, the outcome of this map would not be possible. The map was published twice in the 18th century, in 1782 and 1799. Unfortunately, all 12 of these original copper plates used for printing the map survived in the very good condition in the collections of the Slovenian National Museum. And as a conclusion, some well-known thoughts about a printed cultural heritage, which should be often repeated in order to co-create a better society. So, understanding printing cultural heritage includes map, fosters respect and establishes dialogue between various cultures. Cultural heritage is a central component of cultural identity, diversity, and intercultural dialogue. And because heritage helps people to understand the past and create a better future, it is imperative that it not fall into oblivion or be destroyed. A key role in this process is played by heritage institutions, libraries, archives, and museums, which for centuries have conserved, interpreted, and studied heritage in order to make it available to the individuals, the community, and to society in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that excellent paper. I think it's quite struck there by the inter-European and very local ideas of places as well. So thank you very much. So next we've got Amy Lidster. Amy is a postdoctoral research fellow at King's College London, working on a Leverhulme-funded project called Wartime Shakespeare, the Fashioning of Public Opinion Through Performance, 1593 to 2021. Her principal research interests are in Shakespeare and early modern literature, with an emphasis on the conditions of theatrical and textual production. Amy's first monograph, Unruly Histories, Publishing and the History of Play in the Age of Shakespeare, is currently under review and derives from her PhD research at King's College London, where she explored the relationship between publishing history plays and how they were read and used during the early modern period. She is also working on a monograph and database project called Challenging Authorship in Early Modern Playbook Paratexts, which is based on her 2018-2019 doctoral fellowship at the Society for Renaissance Studies, which examines authorship, authority, and authorization as they are presented in the paratexts of playbooks published in England between 1500 and 1660. She is published in a range of journals and is currently co-editing Edward III for Internet Shakespeare editions. So, Amy, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me, and I will share my screen now. Okay. In this talk, I'll be looking at the significance of the imprint as featured in 16th and 17th century books printed in England, and arguing that these often overlooked materials have played a critical role in early modern texts by helping to construct identities of person, place, and text. Central to my argument here is that other overlapping sense of the word imprint as a verb meaning to stamp, to impress or fix in the mind, to remember carefully. The imprints of books can make important and lasting statements about the text they preface and the places and networks to which they refer. By imprint as a noun, I'm referring to the short statement in a printed book that typically provides some of the following details: name of printer, publisher, wholesaler, place and date of publication. Prior to the inventing of the printing press, the antecedent of the imprint, the colophon, was sometimes a feature of manuscripts, and it often named the scribe of the text, as well as details of its date and location. But as Chef Rogers points out, these statements were sometimes personal in nature, expressing gratitude to God in religious works or a desire for a drink, as in the example here. Colophons appeared at the end of the text, and while they continued to be used in some printed books, publication details migrated to the front to form the imprint. During the 16th and 17th century, imprints most frequently appear on title pages alongside other features, which could include the text's main title and a description of its contents, as well as printers' ornaments or woodcuts. In England at this time, the book trade was centered in London, and title pages were key promotional materials that were, as Tiffany Stern has discussed, pasted around stalls, posts, and walls in the city as advertisements. They needed to provide an enticing snapshot of the text they prefaced, and as satirized in Thomas Nash's Terrors of the Night, some early modern book browsers looked no further. A number of you there be who consider neither premises nor conclusions, but piteously torment title pages on every post, never reading further of any book than imprinted by Simeon such a sign, and yet with your dudgeon judgments will desperately presume to run up to the hard hilts the whole bulk of it. Nash, or the narrator, is complaining here that title pages, with special mention given to their imprints, were the only parts of a book that some individuals engaged with, a rushed, inattentive reading experience that did not stop them from fixing judgments on the text as a whole. Indeed, title pages help to direct a reader's interpretation through the selection and presentation of their different components. Imprints, of course, serve a practical function. They provide basic details about the text production and often where it could be purchased wholesale, in this example, at the sign of the Gun near Holborn Conduit. But imprints serve other functions too. They are markers of authority in place that help us to understand how early modern readers may have approached a given text and to recover evidence about cultural spaces and networks. I will briefly consider a handful of examples now that suggest how imprints can affect readers' understanding of text, authority, place, and space. Firstly, false imprints. Some imprints provide false details that obscure information about publication. At the beginning of the 30 Years' War, the Protestant polemicist Thomas Scott wrote a pamphlet called Robert, Earl of Essex, His Ghost, which offers a call to arms through the person, or more properly ghost, of Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex, who'd been an advocate of militant Protestant intervention before his execution in 1601. Essex's reputation had undergone something of a resurgence by the 1620s, and in this text, Essex's ghost, writing from Elysian, urges readers in England to offer a free and cheerful contribution to the new wars, which were being fought ostensibly along Protestant Catholic lines. The book carries its false imprint into the fictive world of the text, describing it as printed in paradise. In place of accurate details, the imprint is mobilized in the service of the text's main argument. Similarly, in the late 1580s, a number of satirical tracts were published under the pseudonym Martin Marprelate, which attacked the Elizabethan Church and its episcopacy, hence the name Mar Prelate. These contentious pamphlets were printed secretly by traveling presses, and as one would expect, obscured their publication details, but they did so in a way that brought the imprint into the main text and reflected its satirical and exuberant style. In the tract on the left, Hay Work for Cooper, the title page describes the text as printed in Europe, not far from some of the bouncing priests. It was, in fact, printed by Robert Waldegrave in Coventry, England, but the imprint furthers the of the church and playfully suggests the boldness of the project. The Elizabethan government hired a number of writers, including John Lilly and Thomas Nash, to counter Martin in print. They produced a series of anti-Martinist pamphlets that adopted similar stylistic and rhetorical strategies and an air of subterfuge, all of which fed into the imprints. On the right here, the return of the renowned Cavaliero Pasqual of England claims in its imprint, "If my breath be so hot that I burn my mouth, suppose I was printed by Pepper Alley." The description of place seems to echo the pamphlet's purpose, to provide a burning satirical attack on Martin and his criticism of the bishops. The role of these imprints is clear: to obscure the publication details of contentious texts and/or to play with the conventions of the imprint in ways that further the aims, style, and content of the main text. They construct fictive identities of authority and place. I want now to focus on a few regular imprints that convey accurate publication details to show A, how they provide evidence about real individuals and places, but B, that they also do this in a way that requests an imaginative engagement from readers. The two core components of an imprint, the details of agent and location, can be seen as authorizing features that inform the reading experience. Some early modern publishers specialized in certain kinds of texts, and the appearance or advertisement of their name in imprints could remind readers of their other publications. John Day, for example, was an important publisher of Protestant books like John Fox's Acts and Monuments on the left and Protestant treatises on the right, and he tended to advertise his name prominently in imprints, sometimes in larger type than other individuals named on his title pages. Even something as local as a stationer's bookshop sign might shape the presentation and reception of a book. In 1606, John Trundle published an anonymous play about the legendary British past and the history of King Eligior, which features in Tudor Chronicles. The play also contains a subplot involving two characters called Nobody and Somebody, which is mined for comic effect. Trundle's playbook draws attention to the subplot through its two elaborate woodcuts. The figure of Nobody on the title page is all legs and no body, and the figure of Somebody on the final page of the book is all torso. The play's main plot is relegated to a secondary position, even an afterthought. It appears in very small type right here in the middle of the title page blurb. Trundle and his bookshop location at the sign of Nobody may have exerted a strong influence on the layout and balance of the title page. His main woodcut is also an advertisement for himself, and it provides some evidence for how one historical reader, the publisher, read the play and weighed up its different storylines. It also directs other readers' experience and expectation of what is important. The main plot involving King Elidure deals with weak leadership, tyranny, and the importance of stable government. And it was a chronicle history that offered the potential for politic applications in the early Jacobean period. But the presentation of the playbook downplays this aspect. Imprints also reveal evidence about cultural exchanges involving texts, agents, and places, which can help us to understand why certain texts were published in the first place. During the 1590s, two stationers involved in the early publication of plays from the commercial stages were Thomas Millington and William Barley, who invested in plays by Shakespeare on the left and George Peele on the right, among other plays. While the majority of the book trade was centered around Paul's Churchyard, indicated in blue, Barley's main premise was at the upper end of Gracechurch Street near Leadenhall, and Millington worked under St. Peter's Church. These shops were almost adjacent, indicated here by the orange circle, a proximity that may have influenced their investments in plays as they competed with each other's distinctive offerings. They were also in the immediate vicinity of two playing venues, the Cross Keys and the Bell Inn, indicated by the red box next to it, and were well positioned to encourage trade from passing playgoers. They were also situated on what Holger Simers described as a theatrical thoroughfare, extending from the Rose Theatre on the South Bank, across London Bridge and up Gracechurch Street, ending with the theatre and the curtain, both north of the city walls. Their investments may have been motivated by these physical proximities, and the details given in imprints help us to imagine the interconnections that may have existed between different publishers and their wider community, including how these exchanges have directed the survival and printed transmission of texts. Imprints not only reveal evidence about different communities, they also help to construct them. For example, during the 17th century, St. Paul's Churchyard was, in addition to being a site of religious worship, a secular hub for political debate, trade, exchange, and the publication of news and topical texts. One of the churchyard's most well-known personalities was Nathaniel Butter, who from the beginning of his career prominently advertised his name and bookshop location in imprints, seen here in Shakespeare's King Lear, which is published in Paul's Churchyard at the sign of the Pied Bull near St. Austin's Gate. Alongside plays that dramatised England's or Britain's past, Butter became notorious as a publisher of serial news books during the early 1620s. In the staple of news, playwright Ben Jonson describes Butter as an unscrupulous manufacturer of news. And in his continued inquisition against paper persecutors, Abraham Holland capitalizes on the humorous potential of Butter's last name and condemns him for being a paper spoiler who publishes false reports. But to behold the walls, buttered with weekly news composed in Paul's by some decayed captain, or those rooks whose hungry brains compile prodigious books. To see such batter every week besmear each public post and church door, and to hear these shameful lies that would make a man, in spite of nature, turn satirist and write revenging lines against these shameless men who thus torment both paper, press, and pen. The impostors that these trumperies do utter are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and... The reader is left to complete the line, but the conclusion is obvious. Butter, the churchyard's most recognizable news publisher, is the focus of the satire. The question of the accuracy of Butter's news publications is complicated by the limitations of news exchange and transmission during a time when, even with the best of intentions, it was often very difficult to evaluate the veracity of sources. Butter's news books were nevertheless clearly partisan. By the time of the 30 Years' War, they consistently supported military intervention in Europe on behalf of the Protestant cause. In this news book from 1622, the main reports covered in the pamphlet are set out on the title page, along with an imprint identifying Butter, his bookshop, and the printer by his initials. Butter's partisan interests are announced clearly through the coat of arms on the verso of the title page, which belonged to Frederick V, the Elector Palatine and Protestant figurehead of the conflict. Butter's reputation as an investor in newsworthy texts that demonstrate an interest in the political and secular consequences of religious warfare could affect readers' interpretations of his other publications, such as plays from the commercial stages. Most of Butter's playbooks are history plays that have clear potential for politic applications to contemporary events. for King Lear, the Jacobean Union debates between England and Scotland, and for plays such as Rowley's When You See Me, You Know Me, and Decker's The Whore of Babylon, the issue of militant intervention on the continent in aid of Protestant forces. Butter's imprints also connect his books with physical locations and construct a textual map of the southeast corner of Paul's Churchyard, an area which did not have many other bookshops. Butter seems to be physically part of the churchyard. The walls are buttered and battered with him, according to Holland's satire, and his imprints are a kind of textual performance space that developed this popular reputation. They also remain part of Butter's books wherever they go, and as a result, they reach beyond the physical community of place where the books were first published. As books were bought, sold, and traded across the country, Butter's publications carried his imprint with its advertisement of place and authority with them. Little evidence survives about the acquisition of specific titles by booksellers in regional towns throughout the British Isles, but given that Butter's reputation was also established through other texts like Johnson's and Holland's, it is possible that readers looked to the imprint and imaginatively constructed textual communities and cultural spaces. It is not only false imprints that command attention by offering obviously inaccurate information and or blurring the distinction between text and paratext, but regular imprints also request imaginative engagement from readers. As this short paper has attempted to show, these often overlooked paratexts help to recover evidence about cultural exchanges, communities, and the survival of texts, and also to understand how the experiences of early modern readers could be directed by the details contained in the imprint, which are unfortunately often elided by modern critical editions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Amy. I was quite struck there actually by the fact that I know in the 1620s and 30s, the sign of the gun, which I think was run by John Grimond or John Grismond, that was sort of a type founding site as well. So there's sort of that interesting interplay between founding of print and the sort of the advertising of relating to sort of gun foundry. So we're now moving on to our final speaker, who is Laura Onions. Laura is an artist based in the West Midlands. She is a lecturer in fine art with a focus on print at the University of Wolverhampton. And she's also a programme assistant at Grand Union, a contemporary art gallery in Birmingham. Her recent talks and research include Printing and Pedagogy, CAS Research Seminar, London 2020, Claiming Collective Spaces for Reading, the Annual Association for Art History Conference, Brighton 2019, and Being Maker-Centric, Making as Methods for Self-Organising and Achieving Craft Impact in Local Communities and Economies, co-authored book chapter in 2018. Laura's recent exhibitions have been I Am Because We Are project in conjunction with The Haven, Wolverhampton 2019, The Twin, Coventry Biennial, a group exhibition, Coventry 2019, and Art Licks, a group exhibition 2019, and GU Women at Modern Clay Birmingham 2018. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Laura.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for that, Joe. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's really good to be here digitally, but also physically here at the Wolverhampton School of Art. I will just mention that I am an artist and a maker, so although my work kind of is linked to histories of printmaking, I'm very much interested in the making of stuff and doing that with people. So that's why in late 2019, early 2020, I embarked on the creation of a mobile screen printing press called the Gathering Press that would travel to different locations within Wolverhampton and the Black Country as a collective tool for making in place and place in making. The press was built in March 2020, but the pandemic meant the press has not yet been out for a spin. Therefore, within this paper, Printing Otherwise, a Social Infrastructure for Printmaking, I'd like to contribute some ongoing thoughts and research that pursues how a social infrastructure for printmaking may be formed when printmaking is unhinged from a specific location and is instead a roving resource for communities. So perhaps we could imagine space as a simultaneity of stories so far. A thought from geographer Doreen Massey in her book For Space, in which she encourages thinking of space not solely as a physical locality, but as a product of interrelations between people and place. Stories so far implies that spatial relations are always under construction, in the process of being made, and that this making is embedded in material practices. The spaces of printmaking, primarily workshops, are typically owned by organisations and institutions that provide access in numerous ways to their resources. With this ownership comes associated behaviours, expectations, codes and ways of performing that are consciously or unconsciously assimilated by those entering that space. We might ask Doreen Massey's simple yet powerful question, whose geography? Which implies that power relations within a space can affect people's experiences, imaginations, and also the environments they create and exist within. Printmaking is an instrument in the production and distribution of sharing and telling stories, having an enormous impact on cultural, creative, and intellectual life, as well as on social relations. So what happens when this capacity for storytelling is not permanently grounded in a specific location? What might a mobile press offer in terms of the visibility and speaking to localities? Whose geographies are present? Borrowed from sociology, boundary objects, first conceptualized by Starr and Greisner in 1989, represent artifacts of practice that are shared between different domains and at the same time capable of independently representing knowledge from each domain. This is a fruitful way of thinking about the portable press as an object that could inhabit several different social worlds. It is both flexible and concrete, malleable enough to adapt to local needs and users whilst maintaining a common identity across all sites. This opens up the possibility of being unhinged from a singular location or overarching institution. The portable press reverses the dynamics of how we encounter a printmaking space. It does not require people to fit in, but enters a space with existing characteristics, practices, and relationships where narratives can be site-specific. Could this allow for energies and stories coexisting in places of familiarity to be reached and listened to in an alternate way? Printing presses are formidable objects. We admire them for their sculptural aesthetic, as well as their ability to reproduce imagery. Within my experience as an artist working in print workshops, collective moments of social interaction orbit around the printing press. However, a portable press offers a way of thinking about how this social interaction will change within specific local urgencies. This has resonance with theories of social sculpture developed by conceptual artist Joseph Beuys in the 1960s. Centered on the belief that art can include the entire process of living, thoughts, actions, dialogue, as well as objects, and therefore could be enacted by a wide range of people. At the time, this thinking altered how audiences engaged with art within a gallery space. However, subsequent critiques of this model highlight that this only serves an existing art audience. Artist Kiara Phillips has been able to address this concern through her ongoing workshop series. She transforms a gallery space into a printing workshop and invites local groups who often identify as marginalised or minority groups into the workshop to make work together about specific needs or issues within the community. In considering a social infrastructure for printmaking, I scavenged from both of these examples, aiming to bring the process of living into contact with a process of making that directly interacts with the identities of place, which may mingle in harmony, collide, or blur established boundaries, even momentarily. To travel between places is to move between collections of trajectories and to reinsert yourself in the ones to which you relate. Doreen Massey. Inviting the press into a space also invites a clash of trajectories. It carries with it a set of languages and practices that may seem at odds with where it finds itself. And it is within these locations, for example, a town market, a community centre, a women's refuge, that distinctive subjectivities will be encountered. So in encountering these subjectivities, an alternate social boundary could be formed through crossing or blurring existing modes of doing or being in those locations, opening up a temporary, messy, creative space through which the narratives of place may be translated through making together with the press. Returning to the possibility of a boundary object, this becomes a means for translation through material to facilitate the reading of alternate meanings by different groups. So since I began this project last year, I've been questioning how conversations, creations, and experiences of place may be recorded and accumulated over time. How might we navigate these unfixed borders of interpretation differently? One way of seeing places is on the surface of maps, representations of place gathered and accumulated over time. One of the earliest examples of emotional mapping was found in Madeleine de Scudery's 1654 novel Clélie. Scudery produced the Carte d'Étendard, a spatial mapping of emotions, inscribing effects into a social map. And this was a text that I recently was introduced to by an artist whilst working at Grand Union. So taken up in feminist literature, the figure of the map stands for past rigidities that can be reworked from within. The inclusion of experience and emotion into this thinking of mapping space might offer an approach for how the mobile press can evolve a social infrastructure for printmaking. This includes the world of imagining, that carries images across the social landscape. Drawing upon theories of social sculpture and feminist geographies within this paper has formed a speculative contemporary methodology for considering the printing press as a boundary object that spatializes the mapping of experience, a kind of social map that orientates us otherwise towards narratives that stretch the interpretive borders of the place. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. I think we'll all applaud you on the fantastic use of all sorts of technology there, from printing press to movable cameras, which is brilliant. And actually, it's quite interesting. I know you've linked quite well to maps there with our first paper to Renata, but also with Amy's paper, the Marprelate tracks that were printed in the 1580s were actually printed on a moving or a press that was moved around the Midlands, I think, mainly. So there's this sort of idea that what you're doing maybe is a bit of practice-based insight into things that the rest of us are looking at as well in 500 years past. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So we've got some questions come in for everybody. Please do send in, if you've got any further questions, send them in with the Q&A box, which should be on your screens there. We'll sort of we'll start back with Renata, if that's okay. We've got a sort of a dual question for you. So can you briefly present the size of the maps you talked about? So just give us a sense of that if possible. And also, do we have any information on how they were printed?
Yes, the map consists of 12 sheets, each 64 times 46, and altogether map is 192 times 182. And it was printed in Ljubljana. In Ljubljana, there was only one printing house at that time, so it was amazing that such a demanding work was printed in such a small place. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's excellent. I'm going to move on to our second question. I feel like we can have a lot of questions here. So our second question is for Amy. Do you have any information on whether the prints you presented were sold and imported to other countries and so read in other cultural environments such as France, Germany, Italy, etc.?
For the text that I've presented on in this paper, I don't have any specific information as to whether they were circulated abroad. But one thing, the news books that Nathaniel Butter published, those certainly are reflective of a transnational European network of exchange. The way in which news publishers in England received information and accounts of what was happening on the continent was through a series of manuscript sources, letters, other printed texts that were transcribed or published in countries across Europe, moved from one to another, translated into other languages, and then eventually making their way to England. And that's one of the reasons why figuring out and evaluating the truthfulness of the accounts and news reports is so challenging, because it's just a expansive web of networks that's where these texts in different languages are being passed around. So while I don't have specific information for those texts I discussed today, that is certainly one example where there's definitely a cross Europe-wide network of exchange.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, very full answer. And we've got a question for Laura. Now, I must admit this is a bit over my head, so hopefully, Laura, you can answer this. Have you related your project to the UT Pictura Poesis? Hope I'm saying that right.
The what, sorry? Could you say that again?
It's the have you related your project to the UT Pictura Poesis or Poesis?
No, I've never heard of this. I'm not sure who answered the question or asked the question, sorry, but I'd like to find out more about this, especially if it relates or chimes with some of the stuff that I've been thinking about and looking at. So I shall have a look at that.
Well, we'll move on now if that's all right. But we'll put you in touch with the asker shortly. And we've got a question coming from David Atkinson for Amy again. So David says, I work with a lot of imprints that provide only initials rather than names, which sometimes makes them hard to identify. Do you have any thoughts as to why printers, publishers did this? It doesn't seem to be explicable in terms of limited space or of particularly controversial texts.
Yes, thank you for the question, which is a really interesting one. And I don't think it's one that has a single answer. I think there are various reasons why stationers identify themselves only by initials. I see it quite often when it's a printer, so that individual, somebody working as a trade printer. So for example, they're not investing themselves in the text, and that role is being taken on by the publisher or another bookseller. So and in a lot of the imprints that I see, there is usually some clear indication of a specific individual or an advertised location. So potentially it's when that individual is not as crucial, then sometimes I find that the printer is identified by initials, maybe the publisher has the full name, or at least there's a clear indication of a space or a place where the book could be purchased. And of course, yeah, sometimes it can be to do with controversial materials, and other times I think the use of initials can be an indication that for some printers, or publishers, when they become very well known and there's not a need to include their full name. Nathaniel Butter is one who begins his career by including quite a lot of indicators of his full name and the location of his bookshop, and then sometimes those start to they're incorporated less frequently as time goes on, potentially because he becomes so sort of well known, and when you see his name, you know he's from the southeast corner of Paul's Churchyard, and there isn't that need for that extra information. But I think it's something that I guess has to be evaluated almost on a case-by-case basis.
Excellent, thank you. We've got, I believe, a question in the Q&A. Sorry. Okay. Excellent. I've got a question actually, just as we wait for any others to come in, for Laura. I know you mentioned the sort of map making as a feminist act, and I was just thinking about some of the work that's been done on women in printing houses, and particularly in periods that I've studied, sort of in the 16th and 17th century, and you sort of have this idea of I guess tying into sort of feminist ideas of a room of one's own, you know, the sort of idea of having a space, and you've shown that quite clearly there with the space that's being able to use. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit more, just sort of the feminist aspect of what you were saying.
Yeah, thank you. And funnily, like, this is something I wouldn't have been able to do if the conference had taken place in its original location. So it's kind of been interesting to explore making this, doing this here. So yeah, I was thinking more about how like a kind of a feminist interpretation of a map or of space, or how a map may, or the idea of a map may become something that can hold more information to do with, I suppose, relationships or friendships, or the body, or feeling, emotion, so that also as much as kind of location and culture and all of those things that can be taken from maps, but actually we might be able to contribute something else to this. So that's kind of what I was interested in with that, and thinking about how the press could almost plot a journey of some sort through this region in the Black Country. And I suppose the prints that are gathered or produced by people making the press would become markers or points on that map. So I suppose it's giving kind of another layer of information to that kind of cartography practice.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So that is the end of our panel here. So I hope you'd like to just join us in a virtual round of applause for all our speakers. Thank you all three of you for some excellent papers, really very enjoyable. And I think we can all agree a brilliant way to start off the day. So thank you very much. And that's everything from us here. And we'll be, unless we've got any words from Ines or Caroline, I think we'll be joining back at 10:30.